Hello, I'm Steve Lusk with the Red Bank Church of Christ in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I'm here to share with you another in our series of His Life devotionals. His Life is a devotional book that we've been using all this year at the Red Bank Church of Christ to focus our attention on the life of Jesus. As those who are followers of Jesus, we want our lives to emulate His life as much as we possibly can. And so we're learning about so many things about Jesus by looking at these devotionals each week. We've looked at the teachings of Jesus, the miracles of Jesus, the relationships of Jesus, the life of Jesus. And today we're going to look at the mind of Jesus. Did you know that you can find out some things about the mind of Christ by looking at the scriptures? Our text today is from Philippians chapter 2. Now, we've been looking primarily at the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but the rest of the New Testament has a lot to say about Jesus as well. And this is one of those passages. The setting for this passage is a letter that Paul was writing while imprisoned, probably at Caesarea, to the church at Philippi. Paul had established the church at Philippi on his second missionary journey. He had seen a vision while he was at Troas of a man of Macedonia saying, "Come over into Macedonia and help us." And the first place that Paul went in the Macedonian region was Philippi. The first converts that he made there were among a group of women, including Lydia, who was a seller of purple, who had been meeting by the riverside for prayer. They are called those who were believers in God, and they were probably Gentiles who had embraced some elements of Judaism and therefore were considered to be God-fearers or God-believers. Lydia, on that occasion, along with many others who were there with her, were baptized, became the start of the church in Philippi. Later, of course, Paul and Silas were imprisoned at Philippi, wrongfully, of course, but had the occasion there during that imprisonment and the earthquake that followed, the miraculous release of the chains from all the prisoners, to convert the jailer who worked there in Philippi. And so this really disparate group, women who were people of commerce and entrepreneurs, and a jailer who was a Roman in all likelihood, who was tasked with keeping prisoners and protecting them and keeping them from escaping, became the beginning of the church at Philippi. And so it was a different kind of group that apparently, according to some of the things that Paul wrote in Philippians, maybe struggled a little bit with the idea of unity and getting along. And so much of what Paul writes in this Philippian letter is about how to get along with one another, especially when we come from so different backgrounds. And you know, that's a very real problem in our world today, isn't it? It's hard to understand where people are coming from, and therefore it's hard sometimes to understand why they might be upset about something, or it's hard to understand their perspective on a certain issue or concern that they might have. That's why it's so important that we think about what would Jesus do. And so Paul gives us some insight here by inspiration into the mind of Christ. So let's look at this passage, Philippians chapter 2, beginning at verse 5, where Paul said, "Let this, or have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." And so this passage talks about three key things about Christ. First of all, he came in the flesh, his incarnation. And yet, even though we acknowledge that Jesus came in the flesh, he didn't have to do that, did he? He emptied himself. He didn't count being equal with God and being in God's presence for eternity something to be grasped or held onto, but he released that in order to take upon flesh. Furthermore, not only did he come in the flesh, but he was willing to suffer like a servant, to suffer humiliation. He was in the form of a servant. He was willing to serve others. He was made like men. And most people in the world in Jesus' day were in some form of servitude. So when Jesus came into the world, he lived like people lived, and he manifested that servant spirit throughout. And then the third thing that we note in this text about the mind of Jesus is he was willing to die for those that he loved. And that's all of us. He was willing to give himself up and obey God, knowing that he had to be a substitute for us. And by doing so, he would have to suffer on the cross. So these are some things about the mind of Christ that will help us as we try to emulate his life. Are you willing to empty yourself? Am I willing to empty myself, to be humble as Jesus was willing to do? Am I willing to serve others? That is, to seek the other's greatest good like Jesus was willing to do. And am I willing to sacrifice, to give up something in order that others may benefit? That's what it seems to me to be like, to have the mind of Christ. We hope that this devotional thought from our His Life devotional book will have blessed you today. And I hope that you will think about the mind of Christ and what it was like for Jesus to come to this earth and the things that he gave up and the things that he's done for us, and that you will in turn love and serve him more and more each day. If there's anything that we can do to help you, we'd be more than happy to do that. In fact, it would be an honor for us to serve you. So feel free to get in touch with us at the Red Bank Church of Christ, either by phone or by email or through our website. We certainly would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching and tuning in today, and we hope and pray that your life will be more and more like his life.